Are you being stressed by a toxic work environment? And by a toxic work environment, I mean a work environment that has negative factors that are affecting the well being of those who are within it. Well being is underlined. A toxic work environment can result from anything. It can be the general culture of the organization that has negative factors or is toxic. It could be from a supervisor or supervisors that are toxic or that behave in a way that is toxic. It could be from colleagues who behave in a way that can be considered toxic. It could even be from a member of your team, someone that you supervise that behaves in a way that is toxic. And this can affect you, can affect your work, can affect your comfort, can affect your well being. Now, my story. I walked into the office of my supervisor, and my supervisor started to shout at me. This was out of the blue. This was unexpected. This had never happened to me in my working life. My supervisor was shouting. My supervisor was shouting at me in front of my team because their door was open and the team sat right outside them. What happened was this triggered my freeze response because I automatically felt like this was a threat. And to this day, I do not know what they were saying. I do not know what they were shouting about. I do not know what made them so angry because you could actually feel the anger. Because when I froze, everything actually froze. I stopped hearing what it was that they were saying. When they finished their shout, I walked out of their office. I walked into my office almost in a daze or a trance, and I sat down asking myself, what was that about? I did not respond to them. I did not respond the next day. I did not even respond the next week. And I think that was one of the biggest mistakes that I made, not dealing with the toxic behavior as soon as possible. And owing to that, that was the start of one of the worst years, not even one of, it was the worst year in my employment history because that anger that the supervisor had just continued simmering, and it came through in everything that the supervisor did with me. Our interaction was just filled with that anger, and I kept internalizing it until one day I just finally just let it all out in an email, and we had it out in an email because I had had enough. That was months later. This affected me so much that at the end of that year, I actually fell sick and I had to take sick leave. The environment was so toxic, the interaction, the conflict, everything was so toxic that in the end, my body, my well being was affected. Well, when I took the sick leave, I had time to reflect. I had time to resolve some things within me. And by the time I came back from the several weeks of sick leave, I was okay. I had released my supervisor. I had forgiven what needed to be forgiven. I did not hold anything against her. And we actually mended the relationship. We were able to respect each other, be cordial with each other. And the following year was actually a really, really good year. A really good year because that was sort of resolved. For you who is currently in a toxic environment or experiencing toxic behavior, how can you handle this? How can you handle it better than I did so that you do not end up falling sick or just totally losing it, or your quality of life and well being continuing to go down and down and down? So, I'm going to talk about three different ways that you can handle this. The first one is proactive, the second one is remedial, and the third one is self preserving. The thing that I want you to remember, or the statement that I want you to remember when you're dealing with a toxic work environment, this is all about managing your boundaries and managing your expectations. That is what it's all about, managing boundaries and managing expectations. So, firstly, how do you proactively deal with a toxic work environment? For those of us who've moved in motor vehicles, when you get into a car, one of the first things that you do, you close the door, of course, and then you fasten your seatbelt. So this is what you'd be doing with a proactive with proactive management of a toxic work environment, you would be fastening your seatbelt before you start the journey. And how do you do that? Number one is you need to understand what it is that is toxic behavior to you, because we are affected by different things. Different things are toxic, or different things affect us. Different things are a violation of our boundaries. So we need to really understand ourselves. For example, for me, one of the things that just rubs me the wrong way is shouting at me. And when you shout at me, that is considered a threat. So identify the things that for you are a threat. For me, it is shouting. For someone else, it might be silent treatment. For someone else, it might be manipulation or backbiting. So understand yourself. Sit down and think about physically, communication, time, work, the different aspects of work, and what is it that feels like a threat to you, what it is that makes you feel threatened, that makes you feel uneasy. Understand those things and identify them. Understand them, identify them, and really, really name them. Like for me, what I would have done is named the fact that shouting at me is something that I feel uncomfortable with. For most women, we've actually prepared ourselves for the physical, for the touch, the physical toxic behavior from colleagues who, are not have not dealt with that part of their lives. We prepare ourselves for that because we know that there are certain touches that are not appropriate. We prepared ourselves for that. So we need to do that for even other aspects of life. So touch, inappropriate touch. For me, it was shouting at me is toxicity. Shouting at me is a threat. So identify it, understand it, and identify it. Once you've done that, then you communicate it. Like what I would have done in this situation where the supervisor shouted at me. I did not need to shout back at her, but I needed to find a time as soon as possible to go back into the office and inform this person that I do not appreciate being shouted at. If you have something that I have done that is displeasing to you, kindly communicate it to me like adults. I will listen even if you just speak to me. If I had done that earlier, I wouldn't have gone through the whole year of conflict and all sorts of going back and forth in emails or anger or all that kind of stuff if I had just dealt with that early. So communicate what it is that is a boundary for you, what it is that you consider acceptable behavior. Communicate that. And then also manage. So understand what your boundaries are, identify them clearly and name them clearly. Communicate them whenever you're interacting with people. You can even preemptively communicate them, like in a meeting. Say if you have an issue, please raise it respectfully, something like that, and then manage them. Manage it. Manage this. When someone violates a boundary or violates an expectation, the way that you expect to be treated, then manage it. Communicate to them and tell them this is unacceptable. Please talk to me this way, or please engage with me this way. So that's how you can proactively deal with a toxic work environment. Now, the second thing is remedial. That is when something has already happened. You're already existing in an environment that is toxic. Now, again, it means that by the time you've allowed yourself, and I'm using that intentionally, you have allowed yourself to exist in that environment, it is because you are not doing anything to deal with it. So it means you need to understand yourself and understand what a violation of your boundaries or violation of your expectations are. So, one, again, understand what is going on with you, what it is that's making you feel uneasy, what it is that's making you feel like your well-being is being negatively affected. Identify it and name it clearly. And when you identify what the violation is, then take action to repair. It doesn't matter if the person has been screaming at you for a year. When they scream the next time, this time tell them, find a way to communicate to them that you do not accept this. It doesn't matter if the person is using silent treatment to try to manipulate you or to push your buttons. Take the time, find an appropriate time to tell them, I do not appreciate that. If you have something to tell me, kindly tell me. So find a way to repair what it is that has been violated. And after you've repaired that, then now you go to proactively communicating your boundaries and expectation, and you go to proactively managing whenever they are violated. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about is self preserving, that self preservation. At times, the environment is just toxic, that people are not going to change no matter what you do. Staying in a toxic environment, no matter how strong you are, no matter how you maintain, communicate, manage your boundaries, when you stay in a toxic environment, that toxicity begins to get inside you, either by you becoming like the environment, which means becoming like one of the people who has toxic behavior, or by you beginning to devalue yourself so that you can accept to be treated that way. So if you find yourself in an environment that is toxic and nothing is going to be changed, no one is willing to do anything to change it. The HR is not willing to do anything, the directors are not willing to do anything, then, my dear, it is time for self preservation. It is time for you to begin to find your way out of that, because your emotional and mental well being is more important than that job. What this will do to you is it will devalue you. We usually wonder why people who are in abusive relationships, especially women, even if you take them out of it, they end up going back into the abusive relationship. It is because they have reduced their value to the point where they think they deserve that behavior. And that is the danger of staying in a toxic environment for long. Self preservation, preserve yourself, find the exit, because your mental health, your physical health, your emotional well being is more important than the job. So, how do you find yourself in a toxic environment right now? Is that what you're experiencing? Which of these three things do you need to do? What do you want to do to begin to get back the power to redefine yourself, redefine your boundaries, redefine your expectations, and to take a stand? Which of these three things would you want to implement? Please comment, like, and share this with someone. And also tell me how you are managing in this toxic work environment.